I'm George Galloway, and I present كلمة on Al Mayadeen television. Here we are in London. I speak my words freely, either in Parliament, on television, here on the streets of London. كلمة means free word. That's what I speak. So كلمة is a two-way conversation. Check it out on Al Mayadeen television. Welcome to كلمة with me, George Galloway, on Al Mayadeen television, coming to you from London in front of a studio audience of distinguished experts and one or two enthusiastic amateurs like me. Tonight we are discussing whose news is fake news. Donald Trump, or President Donald Trump, as I shall now have to learn to call him, was elected by fake news, according to the mainstream media, which itself has been the purveyor of fake news for decades. A mainstream media that told us that Iraq was bristling with weapons of mass destruction, even under the bed of the president in the palace in Baghdad. A mainstream media that told us that the Libyan army, which didn't exist actually, was marching on Benghazi in order to go house to house and conduct a massacre, and that therefore Western countries would have to carry out their own massacre to stop another massacre. A fake news mainstream media that told us that we were supporting moderate rebels in Syria with our guns, with our money, and most importantly, with our mainstream media propaganda campaign, when in truth we were supporting throat-cutting, head-chopping, crucifying fanatics of the very worst kind. A mainstream media that told us that America was already great and had no need of any agency of change, and that what we needed was more of the same in the form of Hillary Clinton. You see, whose news is fake news has become a gigantic issue in Britain as the fake news mainstream media industry prepares to fight back, prepares to censor, close down, block somehow, some way, so that the challenge to their previous monopoly on media wisdom can be somehow quelled. And we have seen many, many examples of television stations taken off the air, bank accounts belonging to alternative media operations being stopped, people, and I'm one of them, being blackguarded, being slandered and smeared as agents of a foreign power because they challenge what our own power is doing. And we saw in the last couple of weeks the way in which this narrative works. We had thousands of people, mainly women, marching against Donald Trump, and their eyes misting over with nostalgia for President Obama and for the President Hillary Clinton that never was. No one paused for a moment to point out that President Obama dropped a bomb every 20 minutes of his entire 8 years in power. That President Obama, whom they said had no scandals attached to him, actually was the purveyor of the biggest scandals of them all, giving more money, more weapons, and more political cover to the crimes of the settler state of Israel than any president in American history. A man who engineered coups to overthrow governments in countries across many continents. But hey, he was nice and polite, and he dressed nicely, and he wasn't at all vulgar. A perfect example of the false dichotomy which the mainstream media have inculcated so many people who regard themselves as liberal or progressive around the world. But the best example is WikiLeaks. Let me declare an interest. Julian Assange is a friend of mine. I believe in him. And when he tells me, as he has, that the highly damaging, though almost entirely ignored, WikiLeaks emails that they released throughout the course of the American presidential election did not come from Russia or from any other state, but were leaks from inside the Democratic Party's own leadership. I believe him. And here we have a situation where it is being maintained that a foreign power, in this case Russia, imagine, managed to produce a president who is effectively an agent of theirs, when in fact the real reason the Democrats lost the American presidency was because their candidate was Hillary Rodham Clinton. If their candidate had been Senator Bernie Sanders, it wouldn't have mattered how many leaked emails, it wouldn't have mattered what Russia thought. The American people would have elected him, and history might turn out differently. So I've assembled this wonderful audience to talk about their own experience of fake news and whose news is really the fake news. Let's go first to the gentleman in the front row. Yes, you're a journalist yourself, aren't you?
This is Mukhlis Chowdhury. I am the former advisor to the President of Bangladesh and minister and researcher, political analyst and editor. Thank you very much for discussing the very contemporary issue. And my question is, did the WikiLeaks revelations cost Clinton the US presidency?
Not at all, because hardly any voter ever heard of these emails. The very same mass media that tells us these emails, which were hacked, they say, by Russia, were so damaging, have A, not challenged one single word in the emails as being untrue. So we're talking about material which is the truth. And secondly, virtually none of the American media reported these emails in the first place. So how can these emails have cost Hillary Clinton the presidency? They were ignored by the people who now say they were seismic. And most importantly, nobody has challenged a single word that was in the WikiLeaks material. Charles Shoebridge, you're an expert in this matter. Tell us.
Yes, I know a little bit about emails, about security issues for sure. But it's interesting what you just said about the fact that so much of what was released wasn't actually made available in the main media. And this, of course, is itself a form of fake news, because if you only put a few of the facts and leave out the facts that are actually damaging to your narrative, then that is in itself a form of fake news. If we think back to court proceedings, you're not just required to tell the truth, you're required to tell the whole truth, because of course just telling one side can make a big difference. And I was just thinking, just as you mentioned what you just did, about the BBC, for example, its coverage of the Podesta emails, the ones you're talking about, where they didn't ignore it, because, of course, now with social media, it's very difficult to ignore these things, although in America, a lot of the media did totally ignore it. But the way that then they deal with it by saying, for example, a headline such as 7 things we learned from the Podesta emails, and then give you 7 very trivial things that actually are of no consequence, completely leaving out, for example, that these emails that were leaked actually proved, for example, that the Clinton Foundation was getting very substantial funding, and indeed the campaign, from, for example, places such as Saudi Arabia, such as Qatar, that, for example, another leak which showed clearly that Clinton knew, or should have known, that the rebels that she was describing as moderate and democratic, for example, in Syria, were far from it, completely opposite, and were actually linked to groups such as ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And also, for example, where, on the other hand, for example, Hillary Clinton again, subsidized by the people who actually supported one side of the civil war in Syria, the rebels, where she was then saying publicly one thing, for example, we need a no-fly zone to protect people from Syrian and Russian bombardment, and yet in private speeches she'd given to banking organizations.
For big money.
For very, very big money, exactly paid to her, which again revealed by this, was saying completely the opposite, that actually a no-fly zone, correctly, from my perspective, would actually involve the deaths of thousands of civilians in Syria and would actually harm civilians more than the no-fly zone put in would have saved. And so you're seeing there repeatedly where the media are putting forward their version of events, which actually either is completely fake in some ways. Obviously, they put out a lot of factual news too, that is correct. But on the controversial, the contentious issues, always the media on one side or the other seems to go with what the guiding narrative is, whether that's from states or corporations. And what we've seen now, I know I'm taking a bit of time, but what I would say is this, is that the media, the mainstream media, are facing two big problems. One is that people are not buying newspapers and are not watching television news to the degree they used to be. That means that they are not getting, the newspapers are not getting revenue. It means that people are watching online, and there they have ad blockers to stop these advertisings coming in. And it means that the media are absolutely losing revenue, hand over fist, to places like Facebook. And lastly, or secondly, we've seen, as you've indicated, that they also are aware that they are losing their political power. Because, for example, in the Syria campaign, 2013, the media in this country, in America, absolutely supported bombing Syria. And yet the opinion polls showed overwhelmingly that people rejected that media position. And Trump is himself another example, where the media in America, absolutely 99% supported Hillary Clinton. The American people rejected that. And so the media are seeing their power, economic and political, diminishing because there are alternative sources. And now they come up with this notion of fake news to try and discredit and, as you say, bring in devices, which we can talk about later, to actually censor that news, which of course has provided an alternative to what they've been providing, as you say, for decades.
Now, Charles, you're a security expert, you're a defense expert, very considerable one. In your experience, is it the case that these journalists who are working for these proprietors are willfully lying about things, that know the truth but write something or broadcast something different? Or have they been somehow fooled or bamboozled by something? Are they James Bond, or are they Austin Powers or Mr. Bean?
I think what you see is that, no doubt within the media, there are journalists, probably new ones, young ones who are idealistic, who really joined the media because they think that they are fighting for truth and justice and so on. But what you see again and again is the intervention of editors. And it's at editorial level and, of course, at owner level where, of course, the interventions are taking place. And I would say, let's look at the situations that have happened over the years. You've mentioned some, for example, Iraq, Libya, Syria. Repeatedly, we are told fake news. And it's always fake news in one direction. It's always in the direction of supporting the narrative of the US and the UK and now the French governments. And so it can't be a coincidence. But also what you find is 2 or 3 years later, or 5 or 10 years later, there'll be some kind of inquiry. For example, we've had recently in respect of the Libyan invention. And then suddenly it was, oh, actually we were all taken in. How were we taken in? How could we have been so easily fooled when exactly at the same time they're doing exactly the same thing about the next theatre operations? Too much of the media sees its role as being supporting either corporations or the governments that actually stand behind them. And it's in that respect that alternative media, which of course in many cases has its own agenda too, and we need to recognise that, but that alternative media, particularly internet-based, is of course causing panic in the mainstream because they are losing their political and economic power.
Well, it's noble of you to exculpate most of the journalists themselves and throw the blame onto editors and proprietors, and I would like to believe that that was true. But I'm afraid that my long and bitter experience is that this falsity, this distortion and willful distortion goes right down through the ranks. Let's hear from Peter Jukes, another man who knows a great deal about these matters. Peter, kindly say why and give us your views.
Yes, I'm become a journalist after 25 years as a dramatist, basically because I saw more fiction in news than I was writing, and mainly got well known by live tweeting the phone hacking trial minute by minute. I think you might have been mentioning that, George, as a victim of phone hacking. Is that not right?
I was myself hacked.
Hacked, indeed. And I'll get to the Podesta emails in a moment in that regard. So I had to live tweet beat by beat with dozens of lawyers watching me, most of the rest of the journalistic world. And you had to be accurate because you got told off. You know, every morning a lawyer would stand up in the court and say, "My lord, there's been an email," because it'd say it's prejudicial. So I learnt reporting the hard way, 8 months in a court. So we have to stand up for the idea of truth. I mean, the danger is that in this postmodern world, like Kelvin Mackenzie said at the Levinson inquiry, Kelvin Mackenzie, the Sun editor, there is no such thing as truth. And in that vacuum of not believing in truth, I think power operates, propaganda operates. And you know, I completely agree with you. We have a press which is will to power, mainly, an instrument of propaganda for its proprietors. And journalists, terrified, complicit, wanting to get up the ladder, completely enable this way of monstering people, of misrepresenting the truth. What is the Mirror? The Mail and the Sun. The front page is a will to power to distort reality for a political agenda. And I completely agree with that. I still believe in truth, though, and I believe in reporting the truth. So the problem with me with the Podesta emails is they're a big damn squib compared with the cables that Chelsea Manning it came out, hopefully reprieved, now coming out in May or shortened term. They shook the world. They were genuinely revealing about how American foreign policy worked, you know, the deals done in Tunisia, the complicity, and they had a huge impact, and for that, Julian Assange deserves every credit. To be fair to The Guardian, who it went through, you might not like The Guardian, so liberal sellout, but they redacted the names of agents working in Afghanistan. And so apparently, allegedly, Julian might disagree, he didn't care if their names came out. He didn't. So people would have died had those cables been published. It wasn't earth-shattering. My problem with the way WikiLeaks dealt with that even if they did that unconsciously, it so much worked with the timing of the source, the timing of the election. It was done politically. It wasn't reported. And I think, and I've seen security experts said, you can actually work out this was a government operation. The way the hacking worked, if you look at the email headers, I'm not a great security expert, but I think it was quite clear that that email was not an internal dump. I think it's quite clear that email source came from quite a well-enabled body of operators, because it's the way they hacked.
Why don't they show us the evidence for that then?
Well, it is in the headers. People have done work on that, because basically, give him his credit, Julian did release the full emails, and you can track how the hacking worked. Basically, it's how they got into Podesta's emails. It's a big industrial scale. It's a form of spear phishing. You basically go to a site and gave his password address.
Yes.
And then the timing of it.
The username was John Podesta, and the password was the word password.
I know.
So a child in their own
it was
bedroom
password, I think, with a 3 in it or something. It had some different. No, of course, but it's where, if you looked at the other emails, they basically done the spear phishing attempt on about 2,000-3,000 emails. Somebody did an analysis of that, and there were basically Western journalists or Russian and Ukrainians, which would indicate whoever was doing the hacking had a political
Well, everybody has a political and
agree.
geopolitical agenda. We do, I do, you do, everyone.
But George, when I'm in court, I can't afford to do that. I cannot take one side. I have to report fairly.
Well, you have to tell the truth, but as Charles Shoebridge pointed out, there's a difference between the truth and the whole truth.
Absolutely.
I can say that such and such a thing is true, but if I don't add the context of it, I'm not actually telling the whole truth.
Sure.
Now, I didn't like being hacked. And if they were hacking John Podesta's personal love letters to his wife or someone else's wife, that would be a different matter. But they were hacking or leaking emails that were talking about high politics.
Sure.
Now, I take the simple view. I do things and have done things about which I'm embarrassed. But I don't do things of which I'd be ashamed.
Yeah.
And there's a difference between being embarrassed and being ashamed. and you must conduct your political life on the basis that what you're doing may end up on the front page of a newspaper, and you have to work out, if it does, would I be ashamed of that? And if you were ashamed of it, you really oughtn't to be doing it. Am I right?
Okay, can I get a personal example? I've been covering, as you know, this Daniel Morgan murder scandal, which leads back to the Murdoch organisation and corrupt police officers. I discovered I was hacked just after the Mazda Mahmood verdict 3 times. I've been warned a very high security company who's working for 21st Century Fox because of their bid for the rest of the sky. And my colleague Graham Johnson had people outside his door, one on a computer, you know, obviously trying to hack into his stuff. I have no idea what they took. Right? The good thing is I've told everybody, if stuff emerges from my personal or private or professional life because of this hacking 3 times, and again, they deleted even the email I sent to this company, came back in, I can say, well, look, they've hacked me. So they've got it illegally. And then you have to go to the public interest defence, right? Now, I think it is borderline a public interest offence on Podesta, don't get me wrong, because of the professional stuff. But the dangerous stuff taken out of context, and was it really a huge explosion of interest? No, I think you're right. It didn't swing the election. To be fair to the mainstream media, or unfair to them, the masses of coverage, like 8 times, about Hillary's private email server, that's 8 times than Donald Trump's dodgy bank accounts. We haven't even seen his tax returns.
Yes.
So the mainstream media goes for, I don't think it's on Hillary's side, it goes for salacious, exciting stuff, and the political consequences of that are disastrous.
Much more of this after the break. You're watching كلمة with me, George Galloway, on Al Television, coming to you from London, discussing the very vexatious question of truth and fake news or otherwise. I've got a great audience here. Let's continue with their points of view. Yes, sir.
Wouldn't we actually raise serious question marks about the timing, that when actually Trump managed to secure the presidency, that there were many question marks raised and deep concerns raised about the way actually he managed to achieve the massive, unexpected, to some shocking victory, the way he managed to convince the American people, despite the huge amount of fake news and fabricated reports against him, to try to severely undermine his campaign. And we seeing the mainstream media throwing their weight, throwing their support wholeheartedly and emphatically endorsing Clinton's campaign, particularly that Trump has tried throughout the campaign to raise the main issue that is closest to the American people's heart, and he managed to expose the lies and lay clearly bare the inconsistency of the Obama and Clinton strategy. What actually the John Podesta emails have actually revealed, what has been already known, which the media have refused to shine the light on, that Saudi Arabia has been at the forefront and has been spearheading the move of funding and arming the terrorist organizations like Daesh, which is called ISIL, and Nusra Front. He has simply acknowledged that. What Biden has earlier revealed, that most of the funding, most of the arming, indeed hundreds of millions of dollars, tens of thousands of weapons, have been actually shipped through Turkey, mainly funded by Saudi Arabia, with the full knowledge of the CIA, who cooperated with Saudi Arabia to actually prop up what Trump have questioned, and I think it has shifted opinion in his favor, that the strategy endorsed by the Americans were simply to sit on their hands, to stand on the fence, and only contain, that is, weaken ISIL to the extent where they can really maintain them as a credible, viable threat, in order to turn them within the Saudi Arabia project into a military force, a military arm that is used to weaken the government of Syria and also to destabilize and dramatically weaken Iraq, and in turn also weaken Iran. It wasn't until the Russians get involved, until the Russians took the decision to get and to bomb the terrorist groups, ISIL, Al-Nusra and other terrorist groups, which the West has really tried to call moderate opposition, while in the ground they adopted exactly the same ideology, the Wahhabi Salafi ideology, propagated, exported and trumpeted by Saudi Arabia, using the cover and the shields of the Americans, who were collaborating and conspiring with the Saudis to actually say there is moderate opposition when the army, when it has been revealed that all the arms and the trainings by the Americans themselves have actually went to the Nusra front. So all of this Trump has used and has exposed, telling the American, look, your strategy hasn't worked. You said that you're going to degrade and destroy ISIS. We've got ISIL on the streets of America.
Well, there are many things that you raised there that are the fruit, I think, of the rest of this discussion. But I want to just raise one of them, and that is the role of Saudi Arabia. There is a deliberate conspiracy of silence to cover up the perfidy, the venality, the sin, crime, corruption of Saudi Arabia in the Western media. Charles referred earlier to something which has never been reported in any of the mainstream media, namely that these Podesta emails that were leaked or hacked, depending on your point of view, revealed massive financial funding by the Saudi regime of the Clinton Foundation and of the Clinton election campaign. That alone, if made a major issue in the media in America, would have been a death blow. After all, Al-Qaeda were the people who brought down the Twin Towers, killing thousands of Americans, and now Saudi Arabia is giving tens of millions of dollars to Bill and Hillary Clinton. That's pretty big news, except it wasn't. It was only WikiLeaks that revealed it. And just en passant, but for Twitter, I would not know that in the last couple of days, the former Israeli Prime Minister and Mossad chief Zippy Livni, a wanted war criminal for whom a warrant exists in England and in Belgium, was at a meeting and posing for selfies with Prince Turki of Saudi Arabia. If not for Twitter, I wouldn't know that. So this alternative media is a mortal threat to the mainstream media because it means you can no longer cover things up. It doesn't mean, Peter is right, it doesn't mean that everything the alternative media says is either true or the whole truth. But it means that nothing can be covered up. And that's a huge, huge change. Just before I let you back in again, we took the camera out onto the streets of London asking about this question of fake news. Let's take a look at what the people said.
Do you think the CIA claims of Russian hacking is true?
So there's a lot of claims that have been made. Some of them are certainly totally untrue, and others may have some relevance to them, but it certainly doesn't have a bearing on his legitimacy as president-elect or the election itself.
I think Russia, in ways, is involved in elections throughout Europe, in France and Germany. It was in the US. And I think Russia, the most effective tool that Russia has in that sense is fake news and promoting those fake news around those countries.
I don't exactly trust the CIA. I think it's like an oppressive institution, and I think Russia aren't exactly innocent. Like they could have hacked, but I think it's definitely blown out of proportion by like the media trying to create like fear.
I think it could be, very much true in this case, especially with the election and it's sort of the media and the public opinion being channeled towards Trump and Hillary. So absolutely, yeah.
Did the WikiLeaks revelations cost Clinton the US presidency?
I definitely think it contributed to her losing. I think it demonstrated to many American people that she wasn't necessarily to be trusted, that she was too far entrenched in US politics, and that her presidency was not going to be any different to Obama or even her husband Clinton.
I think it did play a role in Clinton's defeat.
I think they did, especially because the case got opened twice, and especially it was coming towards the end of the election, and it came up at a certain time for her, especially bad times. So absolutely, I did.
Yes, sir.
Hello, Mr. غالاوي. My name is Marwan Al-Nasiri. We're talking about mainstream media, and they mentioned here about the funding of Saudi Arabia to the terrorism groups. But I'm surprised nobody talks about for the first 3 years of the Syrian revolution, way before yourself and everybody here heard of ISIS or Daesh, for that I mean. No one has talked about really the accusation of many Turkish government as well of the Syrian regime and the militias backed by Iran committing genocides towards the Syrian people. We don't talk about that.
You talk about it then, go on. You have the microphone.
No, I want to hear your opinion of the allegation.
I completely reject what you're saying, so it's better if you say what you're saying.
The Turkish government and many government and independent organization, Amnesty International, accuse the Syrian regime of committing genocides for the first 3 years before we heard of ISIS. From 2011.
Can you define genocide?
Killing people, burying people alive. We've seen the videos.
That's not genocide, but never mind. Genocide is an attempt to completely annihilate.
They did annihilate. Annihilate Aleppo.
An entire group. So you're saying the Syrian regime attempted to entirely annihilate all the Syrians?
No. But what they
could be a regime with no Syrians.
What they did do. Yourself and myself, how do we know about ISIS? We've seen the videos on YouTube, on mainstream media, both ways. How do we know about the Syrian regime genocides 3 years before we heard of ISIS? We haven't heard of ISIS yet. For the first 3 years, the only mainstream and the fake news, if you want to call it, the YouTube or Facebook news, we've only seen the Syrian regime committing crimes, I'll correct my genocide, crimes against its people. So I want to ask a question. What do you believe? Do you believe the Turkish government official claim that the Syrian regime committed genocides against its people, is it correct? Is it correct?
Well, if that's what they claimed, then manifestly it's false. It's false as a matter of the English language, apart from anything else. I wouldn't believe the Turkish government if they told me today was Saturday. So don't ask me to believe the Turkish government. And I've got news for you. Not many people anywhere, west or east, believe what the Turkish government says. If it is your point...
Amnesty International?
Ditto. If it is your point...
Human rights?
Double ditto. If it is your point, you'd be advised to wait for this because you'll like it. If it is your point that the Syrian regime committed crimes against its people, absolutely yes. And not just in the last 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, but 40 years. It is the case that every single Arab regime, from the Atlantic to the Gulf, from Marrakesh to Bahrain, are dictators, whether they are puppet presidents or corrupt kings, and they have all oppressed their people. You and I can agree on that. I see that we are.
But
that doesn't mean that I'm going to support head-chopping, crucifying fanatics who want to destroy Syria in the name of some self-proclaimed caliphate and impose on the Levantine, Mediterranean, sophisticated Syrian society the mores and the practices of the deepest caves in Afghanistan, because I will not. And by the way, neither will the Syrians, which is why the so-called revolution has lost. It lost not because of Russian arms, not even because of the bravery of the Syrian army, which has sacrificed an ocean of its own blood. It lost because the majority of the Syrians don't want to live like the Taliban. They don't want to live like Al-Qaeda. They're not that kind of people.
Just to clarify one thing, I'm talking about the first 3 years before we heard of ISIS.
No, you've got your numbers wrong, apart from anything else, because
the first time we heard of ISIS was 2013.
ISIS is an offshoot of Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda has been operating since the early 1990s. There's nothing that you know about Al-Qaeda that I don't know. There's nothing you know about ISIS that I don't know. I've been following the development of this Wahhabi, Salafist fanaticism called Al-Qaeda since at least 1992. Now, bin Laden at that time was a hero in the West. They ran beautiful articles about him in the mainstream fake news New York Times. They called him a freedom fighter, but I knew exactly what he was back then. So don't pretend to the audience, which by the way is an Arab audience, so therefore knows that what you're saying is wrong. ISIS did not emerge 2 years ago or 3 years ago. ISIS is Al-Qaeda and Al-Qaeda is ISIS. And that's 20 years, more than 20 years, almost 25 years
I disagree.
in the developing. Go on.
I disagree.
Go on.
ISIS is not Al-Qaeda. ISIS is not Al-Qaeda.
ISIS is Al-Qaeda in Iraq.
ISIS came when the Iraqi army. ISIS came when the Iraqi army failed to protect Mosul with what was the official report by the Iraqi government. There was 3,000 ISIS fighters and there was 60,000 Iraqi army going towards Mosul to liberate Mosul from 3,000 men. How did they lose?
But this is etymologically false, what you're saying. Everybody knows, certainly everybody watching this program.
How do we know the truth from the false? Because that's official statement.
Everybody watching this program knows that ISIS and Al-Qaeda are the same thing. That the Al-Qaeda in Iraq became ISIS. It didn't emerge 2 years ago or 3 years ago. It came from Al-Qaeda in Iraq.
Yeah, but it came from it, but it's not the same.
Well, in what way do they cut the heads off differently? In what way is it not the same?
I haven't seen.
Do they eat the hearts in it with different sauce?
Yes. I haven't seen Al-Qaeda footage before ISIS. We haven't seen footage of what ISIS did. What ISIS did, no other group has done before. We haven't seen it in mainstream media or none, not in the mainstream media.
But Zarqawi.
Yeah, we haven't seen videos of cutting heads.
Who was the leader of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, used to cut people's heads off.
We haven't seen videos.
That's because it was before mobile phones and before Twitter. Are you seriously saying that Al-Zarqawi, as the leader of ISIS, or rather Al-Qaeda in Iraq, did not carry out atrocities, sectarian atrocities? You don't have the microphone, so no one can hear what you're saying.
What's documented?
And you're going to have to wait until after this break, and I promise you, you'll be back. You're watching كلمة with me, George Galloway, on Al Mayadeen Television, coming to you from London. A very spirited discussion now amongst my studio audience, but let's hear once more what the people on the streets of London thought about fake news.
Are the rivals in the US using fake news as part of their political campaigns?
I think definitely they are. It's very easy in this day and age to actually create fake news and create a fake media spin for people to believe in.
There's a lot of fake news on all sides, definitely, and it's something which a lot of people have a responsibility to think about when they're reading news, but it definitely does have an impact on people. I'd say a lot of the fake news does seem to have come from the Democratic Clinton side of things.
The whole fake news thing is all like distraction from like the real issues.
Maybe the Republicans do it probably just as much as the Democrats, but I would argue that it helps the Republicans more in that sense.
Are the Democrats engineering a new Cold War era by creating a fear factor against Russia?
I think they possibly could be. I think it also could be a lot of people's opinion maybe placed in the wrong place, and maybe not to the extent of it being a new Cold War, but something in a similar vein.
I think it's hard to just say Democrats are doing that. It's the whole evolution throughout 8 years of presidency and of Russian actions and American actions that just clashed at some point.
I'm not sure if we may call it a new Cold War, but the animosity that Clinton developed with the Russian state certainly has been very worrying, and hopefully we can move now into an era where those animosities and those tensions will be reduced, and we can hopefully work together to solve some of the problems of the world.
Okay, now, you wanted to just finish one or two points,
I'll just finish my point. My family are live witnesses of what's happening. They're suffering from both ISIS and the militias. There's 43 militias. I just want to clarify that my family in Iraq, Fallujah, and these countries, they've suffered from these two. But the highlight is only on ISIS. The highlight is not on one. Both are criminals, both committing genocide, crimes against the people of this part of Iraq. There's corrupted government. Iraq is a corrupted government.
They're all corrupted,
yes.
From Marrakesh to Bahrain.
I
Don't
totally
single
agree
out
with
the
you.
one in Baghdad.
I cannot disagree with you.
Okay, the gentleman next to you.
Hi, George.
Yes.
My name is Ali.
Ali.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Welcome.
In fact, I met you when I was 9. I remember you passed by the bus in
My
Baghdad.
bus in Baghdad?
Exactly. We were in school. It was my
What
cousin with
happened
me.
to that bus?
God knows. I've seen the old
I
ones
wish
here.
to
Anyway,
see it again.
To just follow up on the conversation, in fact, there is no point to stand on any side in the Middle East. They are all criminals in terms of governments. They are all corrupt dictators, and in fact, they are doing no favor to their people. In fact, only to the West, and the West cannot find a better ally than themselves. Okay, they don't need to do anything. Iran and Saudi, they are the main, if you can call them, the poles who they are feeding the conflict in the area. Okay, I lived in Syria for 2 years. Okay, it was a stable country. However, they have their relation with Iran. Okay, and that's what led them to what happened. There is a big fight between the Russians and Americans. Okay, and the Arabs are paying that because they got to choose at the end of the day which side to go. Okay, if you look at the world, you got Americans. Okay, and they are the leaders. They have the technology. They have the best systems. Okay, while the Russians, all what they have, in my opinion, is just more the nuclear side, because they have sold many countries in the Middle East in the favor of doing deals. And what's happening today, it's literally just destroying any threat to Israel in the area. Okay, and to be honest, they are working really hard, while the Arabs are just lazy and just laying.
Well, I disagree with much of that, but one of the points I must contest is the implication, and viewers of this program know that this is my, if you like, fundamental theme, that the Arabs have no agency, are not responsible for what they do or don't do, that it's the Iranians, or it's the Americans, or it's the Israelis, or it's the British. I'm sorry, that doesn't wash. The Arabs are 400 million people occupying this vast land, blessed with the word of God, the language of God. They have all this oil, all this gas, all this water, all this wealth. The idea that they are children played with by adults, manipulated by adults, doesn't wash for me. The Arabs had a chance to defend Iraq.
Exactly.
But they didn't. They collaborated in the destruction of Iraq. So I find it impossible to accept without arguing that a people who have allowed foreigners from Britain, Poland, America to occupy the Al-Aqsa for all of these decades and cannot lift a finger to come to the aid of the Palestinian people in Gaza, are somehow revolutionaries when they set upon each other and murder each other on an industrial scale, because I just can't accept any innocence in that. So me, I resigned from the Arabs. After 42 years, I resigned from the Arabs. Don't imagine from now on I have anything to do with the Arabs. Madame.
أولا ظاهر عنا بالقاعة حدا مؤيد لداعش وللقاعدة، فما شاء الله يعني بريطانيا كتير محظوظة بهيك أشخاص عم بدافع عن القاعدة وعم بدافع عن داعش، بدل ما يدافع عن الحشد الشعبي المقدس اللي لازم ينرفع على الراس، لأنه شباب بعمر الورد عم يضحوا بحياتهم، عم يضحوا بعوائلهم، عم يتركوا عوائلهم ليروحوا يدافعوا عن كل العراق بكل طوائفه، عم يستشهدوا بالآلاف، بعشرات الآلاف عم يستشهدوا، منهم عم يتركوا عوائلهم، منهم عم يتركوا مقاعد الدراسة، عم يتركوا أشغالهم ليدافعوا عن العراق، ليحرروا العراق من داعش اللي هي ما بتشبه البشر، حتى الحيوانات نستحي نشبهها بداعش، لأنه ما عندهم قلب، ما عندهم إحساس، ما عم يطلعوا اللي عم يحرروا، ما عم يطلعوا هيدا سني وهيدا شيعي وهيدا كردي وهيدا شو. داعش عم تغتصب النساء، عم تنتهك الحرمات، بينما الحشد الشعبي عم يخدموهم برموش عيونهم، عم نشوفهم كيف عم يسقوا النسوان، عم يحملون على كتافهم. بيجي بيقول انه الميليشيا هودي مش ميليشيا، هودي حشد شعبي، هودي اشرف الناس، هودي شيعة علي، وفي معهم من غير الشيعة كمان، كلهم هودي مسلمين، معظمهم مسلمين، في معهم كمان مسيحيين، وبيتعاملوا بكل إنسانية معهم للعالم، وعم يستقبلوهم الناس، عم يستقبلوهم بالزغاريد كمان، شفنا النسوان كيف عم يستقبلوهم بالزغاريد، والأطفال كيف عم يستقبلوهم كمان بكل فرح وبكل محبة، ويتشكروهم إنهم عم يجوا يحرروهم. فلازم كتير يراجع نفسه ويراجع حتى أهله شو عم يسمعوهم حكي، يقولوا لهم إنه هن كانوا مبسوطين بظل داعش، وإنه الحشد الشعبي عم يأذيهم. هاي أول نقطة. النقطة الثانية، لأنه العراق كانت محكومة من قبل صدام البعثي اللي عذب شعبه من الطائفة السنية، أنا ما بقصد أحكي باللغة الطائفية، ولكن كونها كانت الطائفة هي اللي حاكمة العراق، وهلأ انتقلت صارت يعني بيد الشيعة، بيعتبروا إنه هن فقدوا السلطة، ومن هذه الناحية عم بيعتبروا إنه هن انظلموا، وعم ينشروا بنشر الفتنة، إنه بينشروا إنه هن كمان الحشد الشعبي والقوات العراقية بدها تقضي على السنة وتاخذ مصرياتهم، وهذا كله حكي كاذب، مثل ما كنتوا عم تحكوا إنه استعمال الميديا بشكل مخطئ، يعني بشكل كاذب، تشويه الحقائق. اللي من عم بيحرر الحشد الشعبي، اللي من عم بيحرر اي منطقه عم بعيدها لاهلها، واللي هن اهل السنه عم بعيد لهم اياها، فلازم كمان يعني ينصفوهم. شكرا.
Okay. Your contribution illustrates precisely a point that was attempted to be negated earlier on, that there's no such thing as truth. There's only your truth and my truth. First of all, he did not support ISIS. On the contrary, he condemned ISIS, and he reported that his family were suffering under ISIS. He did have a slightly ambiguous attitude to how ISIS came to be and what Al-Qaeda was like, but he did not support ISIS.
But he supported Al-Qaeda.
But you said he supported ISIS.
Well, the same. Al-Qaeda and ISIS are the same.
Let me continue, because you made a very long contribution. Secondly, you denounce sectarianism and then begin speaking in sectarian language yourself. The Saddam Hussein regime was not the Sunnis. There were many Shia in the Saddam Hussein regime. I know because I met them. There were many supporters of the Saddam regime amongst Iraqi Shia. I know because I met them. There were many Kurdish people in the Saddam regime. Saddam was an equal opportunities dictator. He crushed everybody, anybody. He didn't care whether they were Sunni, Shia, Kurd, Arab. He only cared whether you were with him or against him. So it is fatal, frankly, to any possibility of a future for Iraq for people to talk in these sectarian terms. It is undoubtedly true that some of the militias liberating the territory from ISIS have committed crimes. Nobody denies that. No, even their leaders don't deny it. Even you didn't deny it. You said that they have done some wrong things. They have, but not because they were Shia. They didn't do it because they were Shia, and they didn't do it to people because they were Sunni. This false dichotomy is playing into the hands of the enemies of the Arabs. Why can't we start talking about Iraq and Iraqis? Or even better, about Arabs as Arabs, about Muslims as Muslims? Because we're doing the job of those who hate the Arabs, who want to weaken them, by talking in sectarian terms. Now, I was quite clear, brutally clear with the gentleman when he spoke, that ISIS and Al-Qaeda are the same thing. They are the same mentality. I saw the crimes of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And I saw the crimes of Saddam Hussein. But if you ask me, was Iraq better under Saddam Hussein than it is now? My answer is yes. Definitely yes. But I'm not confident that's your answer. And I see from the shake of your head that it isn't. And that's the problem. Yes, the gentleman at the end.
Yes, Assalamu alaikum. My name is Dr. Mustafa Traore from the website andopenai.org. And I'm going to move to some different part of the world, France, because this is where I come from as well. And also because, just like you, are resigned from the Arab world. So I wanted to say, because we're talking about fake news, I've got one in mind is what is happening right now in France with the elections. It seems that the media, they are putting forward one of the candidates whose name is Macron. But when
he seems to have emerged from nowhere.
This is what the media
liberal elite candidate. Yeah.
Yeah, it is more in the interests of the media because he's part of the system, and you know, because Hollande resigned because he does not want to go for a second mandate.
Well,
so
he has only 4% support.
Yeah. So the only person who is
not
left,
sure he resigned as much as was sacked.
He was sacked, let's say. Yeah. So the only person who is left, who the media, the system can support, is Macron. So they're putting him forward. But the person I think most French people like and are more likely to vote for, I think that person is Mélenchon. If France wants a change, it is Mélenchon. And by what I hear in the streets of Paris, of France, and all the people, even the French people living in the UK, what they're saying is that they're going to vote for Mélenchon. So
Mélenchon is France's Bernie Sanders.
He is, definitely.
And Bernie Sanders should have been the candidate in the United States.
Yeah, and
Mélenchon should be the candidate in France.
Let's hope, yeah.
But Sanders didn't make it, and Mélenchon's not going to make it either.
I think it depends on us.
You think so? Well, look, we'll come back and talk more about this after the break.
Thank you.
You're watching كلمة with me, George غالاوي, for Al Mayadeen Television, coming to you from London. So spirited is the discussion that the people are even arguing now without the microphone. It's fantastic. This is كلمة means free word. Yes, gentleman at the back.
Hello there. My name's Andrew Spears, and I'd be quite interested today from a point of fake news. as a tool of the British government for many, many years in lots of different theatres all over the world. It's interesting to see.
You were a soldier, were you?
Special Forces, yes.
Special Forces, my goodness.
And it's very interesting for me as I attend here to listen to people from countries that we had a direct effect on. But
countries you invaded.
My point is that I was a tool of the state for Margaret Thatcher, and then realised what a horrific person she was and how many people she killed. And through that indoctrination that I received at the hands of Margaret Thatcher, in an almost equivalent way to ISIS or to Al-Qaeda, in the thought pattern of being in the Falklands and being told, no stopping, 24 hours, cut heads off all night. And that was whispered to us on the front line every night for 3 days and 3 nights. No more messing about. We need to send a message. And again in Northern Ireland, and again when we went into Iraq, and it's a correlation I've always noticed from my father's point of what happened to the miners and what happened to the unions, and how that was also affected by this complete ideology of destroy and eradicate, in my opinion, as I've got older, the working class and people that have died and fought for this country. And to destroy those other countries that are not necessarily au fait with our country's ideas.
Yeah, not playing ball. Hallelujah, what a wonderful
and that's all I'd like to say.
Well, you say all you want to say, but what you said was very profound and powerful indeed. Now, gentleman just next to you, yes?
Hi, my name's Neil, and basically I'm speaking as far away from you can get as an expert, so I'm just really after answers or, questions.
Oh.
That basically what is real. Well, the only thing I see that obviously the establishment is trying to, one, destroy Corbyn, one, they're scared of Brexit, Trump in America, and again, and they're trying to shut down alternative media. But also as well on the alternative media, what is true and what is false. For example, what is the New World Order? Does it even exist? What is their end game if it does exist? Is it a one world government, one world currency, or is that just, a figment of Alex Jones's imagination?
Well, I'm sorry you mentioned him.
Yeah. Sorry.
There's a video on YouTube or on Twitter of Alex Jones that would make your blood run cold, I must tell you. He's the face of fascism in America, having posed for the last few years as a libertarian. In fact, he's a jackbooted fascist. The short answer to your question is that something is no more likely necessarily to be true because it's in the alternative sphere than it is in the mainstream sphere. And some writers in the mainstream are definitely still worth following. For example, I'll give you two on the independent newspaper, Robert Fisk and Patrick Coburn. I read them every day because they have an established credibility with me and a track record. Now, you may say, well, you've been doing it longer than me. How can I necessarily trust them? Well, you've got to ask yourself, do you trust me? Or do you trust somebody else who's giving you a recommendation? That's the best way forward. So that if someone like me is saying, or someone like Charles is saying something, you should listen to it because, hey, we've been right most of the time, in my case, all of the time, since 1974 at least. I think I made a mistake around 73, 74 on one or two things. And thirdly, you have to compare and contrast. I saw a good slogan once, whatever you're watching now, watch less of it and try something else instead. whatever you're reading now, read less of it and read something else instead. And this question of what is truth, it's really a deep philosophical question above my pay grade. I've come to the conclusion that there is, in politics anyway, maybe it's science might be different, but in politics there is no truth. There's only your perspective on the truth and mine. Anyway, I said I wouldn't speak too much because there are other people trying to get in. Yes, gentleman at the front.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Malik. I'm from Coventry University as a student in politics. You mentioned from the beginning, and we talked about it as well, Iraq and the Iraqi war. And many argue, and a lot of people say that we were fed up with a lot of lies. But when we look at it, it was more just the secret intelligence services, for instance, of Britain and of the United States, who has given intels, make up the media to just spread the intels, and the government needed to make a decision. So, for instance, it wasn't a lie. When we talked about weapon of mass destruction, we need to go back to, for example, the secret intelligence services and the famous dossier, which is called in Britain, for example, who has said that the weapon of mass destruction were there, and the strong link of Saddam Hussein to their terrorism group were there as well. Much later, of course, unfortunately, this has been revealed that from more intels that it was just a mistake from the security of government of the United States and the England. So it wasn't a lie by itself from the media. So that's why it's important to try.
Well, it was fake news. I only disagree with you in terms of the order in which it came. The intelligence services produced the fake news because the government asked them to. And the media broadcast that fake news about Iraq because the government wanted them to. Yeah. Who was indicating? Yes, sir.
Thank you. Talking about fake news, that was probably the mother of fake news with the invasion of Iraq. Whatever the whatever the procedure was, actually, who followed who ordered who, the result was the mother of fake news. Now, fake news as such, is it really that important whether the news is fake or real? If indeed we accept your, George, premise that there's your perspective and there's that somebody else's perspective, probably the difference is not that great if you consider that the news serves a political perspective, a policy course. Well, fake news is generally probably scoffed upon and should be. That's fine. Whether something happened or not happened is important, but even more important is what you're trying to say using fake or even real news. Because as somebody who's been in the radio, in the news for 40-odd years, I know that you cherry-pick facts to paint a certain picture.
No, thank you. I don't respond to it, not because it wasn't interesting, but because I'm running out of time. Was there anyone who hadn't spoken who wants to? Yes, sir.
Mr. Galloway, thank you very much. Nicholas Hurley, Master Student, King's College London. Many people draw a connection between the rise of Trump in the United States and the recent vote to leave the European Union. Do you see a connection there between these movements? And as someone who I understand you did have an involvement in the campaign to leave the European Union, is that a connection which you like? And I'd just quite like to get from you precisely what is your position on Donald Trump?
That I am not happy that Donald Trump is the President of the United States, but I'm very happy that Hillary Clinton isn't the President of the United States. That's not the same thing as being pro-Trump, supporting Trump. It's just that Hillary Clinton would have been a big disaster for America and for the world. Trump may also turn out to be a big disaster. The difference is we don't know that yet. We certainly already knew it about Hillary Clinton. But the linkage that you make is undoubtedly true. The fake news industry, which is the mainstream media, seeks to make dominant, hegemonic, the idea that the way things are is the only way that things can be. Trump said, "Make America great again." Hillary said, "America's already great." But for scores of millions of Americans, America isn't great at all. And they've all got votes, and they use them to make a change. Ditto, the liberal media and the political class here argued that the European Union was here to stay. It was an unalterable fact. But people have votes, and when they get the chance, and the issues are clear enough, they are capable of combining to decisively vote against the wishes of their masters. And that's what's happened in Brexit. Both Brexit and Trump are giant disruptors of the prevailing orthodoxy. The thing that you are told is just it. Nothing can be done about it. Francis Fukuyama described it as the end of history. Well, he's learned, and to his credit has now acknowledged, that history hasn't ended at all. That the people always have the possibility of changing history. So they are linked. They are a giant disruption. They are a necessary but not sufficient condition to move forward. In other words, just by disrupting, you cannot necessarily move forward, but if you don't disrupt, you cannot move forward at all. And therefore, this argument about fake news, mainstream news, will rage and rage, and no conclusion will ever be reached, because some of the alternative news will start to look like the mainstream news, and some of the mainstream news will start to look like the alternative news. Nothing is ever finished. Everything always continues. So the best thing is to identify sources that you trust. And if you're too young or not yet in a position to say that you have yet identified these sources that you trust, go to the sources that people you trust are directing you in. And I all the time make the point that you shouldn't in life make choices until you have to. You should, as long as you're able, take the best of the mainstream media and the best of the alternative media, as long as you are able to. Whether they close us down is, of course, a moot point. But the good news is, in the 21st century, it's pretty difficult to shut somebody up. They haven't managed yet in the case of me. I want the last word to go to Peter Jukes, if you'll pass the baton down. Peter, be fair to say, or to infer, that you're not the biggest fan of alternative media, and neither are you the biggest critic of the mainstream media.
Are you sure about that, George? I mean, I get criticised, threatened only the other day with legal suits by the mainstream media. Last time it was Paul Staines in the middle of the night. Guido Fawkes, an alternative media source.
He's alternative.
Yes. I mean, the problem is what you're saying, and it's great listening to you, is this disruption. Are we going to get this revolutionary moment you're talking about? Are we going to have a regressive moment? And a lot of these new disruptors are white supremacists, nationalists, Islamophobes. And this is my fear, that we'll miss, the neoliberal order will miss the liberal bit. But just on the fake news thing, I think, especially in Britain, I think this is an important problem. We've got to separate fact and comment. Everybody's subjective, everybody has their politics, but you can have your own opinions, but you can't have your own facts. And it matters whether that's a cup of coffee or it's polonium. It matters whether the Holocaust happened in that or not. And only on the basis of some empirical evidence can we actually move forward.
Well, I think that's a very powerful note to end upon. This is actually neither coffee nor polonium. It's a cup that says kalima horra, free word. Every word has been free here this evening, and I hope the audience enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.